you're all very safe and that you're all doing well, and your families as well. As you know, we are living through extraordinary times, and emergency services across Europe and the world are doing everything they can to tackle the challenges faced by this pandemic. So we are very happy and honored to share with you today the information we have collected on how European countries are facing COVID-19. And we do hope that this information will be useful and that it will help you across the globe. Please note that this webinar will be recorded, as many of our public safety members are very busy and couldn't attend this webinar live, despite 100 participants in this call. And before starting, I wanted to present you the agenda of this webinar. First, we're going to start with approximately 20 minutes video of Dr. Alberto Zoli, who is a general manager of AREU in Lombardy, Italy. AREU manages all the 112 PSAPs and the ambulance dispatching PSAPs in the region of Lombardy, which is about 10 million inhabitants. I also want to take the opportunity to thank Luca Bergonzi from Beta 80, who has run this interview. Luca is also our Tech and Ops Committee Vice Chair. So thank you so much, Luca, and your team. We are very grateful for your help in gathering this very unique testimony. Second, we're gonna go through a document that we compiled, and I also very much want to thank my colleagues who worked very hard on this. We will present this document, which is Data and Strategies on Emergency Calls and Public Warning During the COVID-19 Outbreak. It's gonna last about 20-25 minutes. And then I will run through a series of recommendations we have tried to compile. We hope they will be useful for you. And then the floor will be open for about 30-35 minutes for any questions and answers and contributions. I want to take the opportunity to apologize because we had announced that this webinar would be 1 hour, but in between we got the video of Dr. Zoli, so we decided to extend the webinar to 1.5 hours. Sorry about that, and I hope many of you can stay a little longer. And well, that's it for the introduction part. So I propose that we start with by watching the video of Dr. Zoli interviewed by Luca Bergonzi. And I'll give the floor and the control to my colleagues to start the video.
E il servizio di soccorso sanitario. Innanzitutto ringrazio Alberto per aver dato la sua disponibilità a questo podcast, in un momento nel quale è in prima linea nella gestione dell'emergenza Covid-19. Pensiamo che sia importante condividere tutto ciò che è stato messo in campo qui con i colleghi delle altre centrali operative europee, che stanno vivendo in questo momento la prima fase del contagio, in modo che l'esperienza italiana sia di aiuto a tutti. Il comitato di EENA ha raccolto le domande più frequenti alle quali stasera Alberto cercherà di rispondere. Inizio con le domande. Allora, la Lombardia, come sappiamo, è stata la regione italiana più colpita da questa pandemia di Covid-19. Che strategia avete adottato all'112 per far fronte all'aumento esponenziale di chiamate? Come gestite l'emergenza quotidiana attraverso questo periodo di crisi?
La prima cosa che bisogna sottolineare è che la Lombardia ha più di 10 milioni di abitanti, quindi è un terzo dell'Italia, e che l'epidemia è partita appunto dalla Lombardia e che ha compreso e ormai coperto tutta la regione. Quindi il numero di infetti e anche di morti è imponente, è altissimo, ed è quasi esclusivamente della regione Lombardia. Quindi è la regione più colpita in assoluto ed è una regione molto popolosa. L'112 in Lombardia c'è da tanto tempo, quindi tutta questa crisi, questa emergenza, che è un'emergenza sanitaria, un'emergenza che si è rivelata ovviamente sull'1-2, si è ribaltata su questo sistema. Quindi le chiamate sono aumentate in modo esponenziale e quindi cosa abbiamo dovuto fare sin dall'inizio? Ripeto, per noi è stata una cosa improvvisa, non c'era nessun allarme precedente, se non quello che preveniva la vaccina e che ci aveva fatto prevedere con un piano a livello nazionale, ma che ancora non aveva visto la luce questo piano. Quindi ci siamo organizzati in corsa e il servizio 1-2 è stato da subito, insieme agli ospedali, il servizio più toccato, più coinvolto, perché quando hanno una chiamata, quando devono fare una richiesta di soccorso, in Lombardia chiamano l'1-2. In questo caso l'emergenza sanitaria, come tale, si è ribaltata qui. Essendoci milioni sui sistemi di comunicazione di persone coinvolte, le chiamate sono arrivate che stavano l'una sull'altra, ma comunque a un certo punto non erano più in grado di far fronte a tutte le chiamate e quindi abbiamo messo in piedi delle rivoluzioni, delle linee strutturali che dal punto di vista dell'impostazione dei sistemi, dei flussi delle chiamate è rimasta la stessa. Dal punto di vista della gestione delle chiamate si è modificato profondamente. E in particolare si è modificato profondamente il rapporto tra l'1-2 e il servizio sanitario. E quindi su quella parte di soccorso sanitario, che in Italia è 118, in questo caso si sono dovuti mettere a punto dei sistemi tali per cui non si potessero perdere, non si perdessero delle chiamate su patologie tempo dipendenti, visto l'alto flusso e vista la saturazione. Abbiamo in alcuni casi richiamato dai riposi, dalle ferie, quelli che erano in ferie, ma non è che sia stato un aumento esponenziale degli operatori, perché non abbiamo operatori pronti, essendo così qualificati, così professionalmente preparati, non abbiamo gli operatori pronti per reintegrarli con delle forze che vengono da turno se non formate. E la formazione su 1-2 non dura poche ore.
Certo.
A questo punto il lavoro è stato fatto all'interno dell'1-2, cambiando le procedure, introducendo procedure sanitarie, con delle domande di tipo sanitario, in modo da far cambiare anche il disciplinare con il quale si lavorava in tempo di pace, perché questa è una vera e propria guerra, con tanti morti, e si è modificata proceduralmente, protocollarmente, si è modificata il lavoro all'interno dell'1-2. Sicuramente abbiamo prima cercato di proteggere le patologie dipendenti, in modo che non ci fossero minuti e decine di minuti di ritardo nella risposta per un infarto, per un ictus, per un trauma maggiore, tempo vita in questo caso. Ordinariamente noi viaggiavamo sulle 14.000 medie chiamate al giorno. Da un momento all'altro siamo arrivati ad avere quadruplicate, se non quintuplicate, meglio dire quintuplicate. Quindi in un giorno le chiamate si sono quintuplicate, da un momento all'altro, da un giorno all'altro.
Sì.
Questo non è poco. Quindi dovevamo mettere in piedi qualcosa di diverso. L'abbiamo fatto e più che potenziare in modo enorme, quindi è sufficiente, non potevamo. L'1-2 siamo andati a potenziare il 118, e cioè il soccorso sanitario. Sempre però attraverso delle procedure nuove all'interno dell'1-2.
Vuoi farci qualche esempio di differenza tra i protocolli nuovi e quelli precedenti? Come è cambiato il lavoro degli operatori dell'112?
Allora, da subito, nel giro di poche ore, abbiamo messo in piedi un altro sistema, che era un numero verde, che nella nostra regione è l'800 800 89 4545. Il numero verde è servito, quindi non è parte dell'112, è stato fatto un lavoro apposito con del personale appositamente reclutato e formato, che ci ha permesso di sgravare, quindi di togliere dall'emergenza sanitaria quello che non è emergenza sanitaria. Perché c'è stato un giorno, cioè il giorno 23 di febbraio, con 408.000 chiamate su questo numero, appositamente pubblicizzato, e con la nascita di questa centrale nuova, una centrale per il numero verde, una centrale dove si danno delle indicazioni, delle informazioni, delle risposte che i cittadini non potevano avere dal numero 2. Inizialmente, nell'arco di 12 ore, siamo riusciti a mettere in piedi una centrale, o meglio dire, 2 centrali, una a Milano e una a Catania, in Sicilia, che con in totale 130 operatori, formati nell'arco con dei moduli formativi di un'ora ciascuno, ma cioè di un'ora. Quindi abbiamo reclutato volontari, tutti appartenenti al mondo del soccorso, comunque volontari, che in poco tempo sono stati preparati e messi in una centrale nuova.
Mi avevi fatto vedere, prima di cominciare l'intervista, un esempio pratico di nuova procedura che è stata introdotta verso gli operatori dell'112. Vuoi parlare, far vedere anche alle altre che cosa avete pensato di fare praticamente?
Tutto parte dall'112, tutto il procedimento parte dall'112. E poi abbiamo introdotto all'interno dell'112, quindi da parte degli operatori dell'112, operatori tecnici, cambiando le procedure, abbiamo introdotto delle domande di tipo sanitario. Per esempio, per riuscire a deviare sull'offline, quindi sulla linea di sollecito, verso il soccorso sanitario, tutto quello che era critico, abbiamo introdotto la domanda: è sveglio? Respira? E di qui, se non era sveglio, non respirava, quella telefonata finiva comunque, telefonata e scheda dentro il soccorso sanitario, attraverso le linee di sollecito, in modo da avere una risposta immediata. Queste si chiamano patologie tempo-dipendenti, ictus, infarto, trauma maggiore, insufficienza respiratoria acuta. Che cos'è nel caso nostro? Covid-19 è insufficienza respiratoria acuta.
Certo.
In termini sanitari, in termini clinici direi. Poi abbiamo introdotto un'altra serie di domande che sono quelle che a scalare, dove ci sono all'interno delle domande tipo: fa la febbre, o meglio dire, supera i 38 gradi centigradi, o meglio dire, muove bene le braccia, parla. Questo qui era per capire se uno aveva un ictus o no. Ok? Oppure ha un dolore al petto, questo qui era per capire se ha o aveva un infarto o no. Bene, in questo caso comunque si procedeva in modo tale che se c'erano delle risposte positive in questo senso, si ritornava sulla linea di sollecito verso il soccorso sanitario. Poi abbiamo aperto, se le domande invece portavano alla non criticità e c'erano problemi che potevano essere risolti con le informazioni del numero verde, si finiva sul numero verde. Per esempio, se c'era la febbre, dopo aver fatto delle domande, c'era la febbre ma sotto i 38 gradi centigradi, si poteva finire sul numero verde. Per quelli invece che non avevano la criticità, e sto parlando sempre in ambito 112, tale da entrare nelle linee di sollecito, le chiamate potevano anche essere interrotte, si faceva la scheda e poi si inviava anche la scheda, solo la scheda, al soccorso sanitario. A questo punto abbiamo per forza dovuto cambiare l'organizzazione dentro il soccorso sanitario,
E infatti la prossima domanda, ci spostiamo appunto su questo secondo aspetto, sapendo che AREU gestisce anche il coordinamento del soccorso sanitario sul territorio, volevamo chiederti quali evoluzioni ha subito il vostro servizio di soccorso sanitario in termini di staff, protocolli e dotazioni tecnologiche.
Staff, c'è stato un aumento enorme di operatori, abbiamo reclutato 80 nuovi medici che sono specializzanti, anche questi volontari, specializzanti nelle varie scuole di specialità o specialisti. E comunque sono messi a disposizione, sono gli 80 medici che ho citato prima. Poi abbiamo reclutato anche degli igienisti per l'aspetto organizzativo, quindi abbiamo fatto, questo gruppo abbiamo fatto nascere delle sottocentrali con 15 postazioni e a turno con delle formazioni al massimo di 3-4 ore che potevano appunto prendere le schede, una volta che sono stati formati, sono stati messi dentro queste sottocentrali del soccorso sanitario, ancora una volta lo ripeto, richiamavano il cittadino e facevano con loro il lavoro che non si poteva fare direttamente come si è in tempo di pace. In questo modo abbiamo sgravato nella parte meno urgente il soccorso sanitario, perché quello urgente andava sulla linea di sollecito, e comunque siamo riusciti, con la preparazione che siamo riusciti ad avere con questo personale medico e infermieristico, siamo riusciti a ridurre anche il ricorso al trasporto in emergenza. Per esempio, un quarto delle schede poi sono esitate nell'intervento con l'ambulanza e quindi con il soccorso vero e proprio. Se avessimo mandato tutto direttamente al soccorso sanitario, il 90% di tutte le chiamate avrebbero procurato e indotto un soccorso vero e proprio, cioè un dispatch con la partenza di un mezzo e una missione. Anche dal punto di vista organizzativo è nata un'altra sottocentrale di tipo organizzativo, anche questa gestita da medici, igienisti e di organizzazione. Quindi è rinforzato molto dal punto di vista numerico e qualitativo il personale del servizio di soccorso sanitario, che è la mano destra rispetto alla mano sinistra o viceversa della nostra azienda. Centrali a parte e un'organizzazione a sé stante rispetto all'1-2.
Ok. Ti faccio quindi l'ultima domanda, che in realtà è più una richiesta di suggerimenti. Ci sono dei consigli che vorresti dare ai tuoi colleghi dell'112 in Europa per affrontare il picco di epidemia che in altri paesi magari deve ancora arrivare?
Il primo consiglio è quello di organizzarsi prima, non essere costretto come me a cambiare radicalmente l'organizzazione sia dell'112 che del soccorso sanitario in poche ore. Devo dire che neanche io ci credo per quello che siamo riusciti a fare. Uno dei miei collaboratori un giorno ha detto: avevo fatto in 3 ore quello che generalmente facevamo in 3 mesi e abbiamo fatto in 12 ore, per esempio, far partire il numero verde in modo che si fosse operativo e proficuo e utile. Abbiamo fatto in 12 ore quello che avremmo magari messo in piedi in 2 mesi, perché effettivamente noi siamo stati travolti per questa epidemia e questo non me l'aspettavo neanche io di avere una risposta così. Così come è vero che i politici, quando io ho detto l'1-2 è in grado di fare tutto, dopo 24 ore e l'1-2 particolarmente, diciamo, pressato, se non addirittura sommerso dalle chiamate, credevano che io avessi sbagliato, ma anzi hanno pensato seriamente che io avessi sbagliato. Però per fortuna sono riuscito a dimostrare che l'1-2 è l'unica cosa che può funzionare in questi casi. Semmai, per chi non è organizzato come siamo organizzati noi, cioè se un'unica organizzazione che segue sia l'1-2 che il soccorso sanitario. E ancora una volta, ripeto, questa è un'emergenza sanitaria, cercate di essere perfettamente integrati e non essere corpi separati, perché altrimenti non sarei riuscito nel tempo. Oggi, per esempio, ho una media di risposta sull'1-2 di attesa alla risposta del cittadino che è di 12 secondi. Il tempo di pace sono 3 secondi, ma 12 secondi quando avevo decine di minuti, sempre sotto l'ora, ma decine di minuti di risposta, sono un altro mondo. E questa stabilità ce l'ho già da 4-5 giorni, per 5 giorni. Questo perché ha funzionato quel meccanismo che ho illustrato prima di rafforzamento del sistema 118 per salvare l'1-2, ma salvare anche i cittadini per avere un soccorso adeguato ed effettivo.
Quindi diciamo che tra i suggerimenti riguardanti la riorganizzazione della struttura mettiamo sicuramente anche la revisione dei protocolli per tempo, il controllo che ci sia sufficiente personale per fare carico all'aumento di chiamate che sarà assolutamente automatico quando ci sarà il picco di contagiati, e infine anche, come dicevi tu, il coordinamento con le altre forze, con le altre agenzie del soccorso, specialmente con quella del soccorso sanitario.
Allora, primo, per quanto riguarda le procedure del PSAP che avete intravisto prima, assolutamente sì, bisogna cambiare completamente e radicalmente sia all'interno dell'1-2 che all'interno del soccorso sanitario. Ancora una volta è un'emergenza sanitaria. Poi, per quanto riguarda il versante 1-2, sul personale, le nostre centrali operative non hanno rafforzato molto il personale, però hanno richiamato in turno chi non era in turno, chi era in permesso, chi era in riposo, e quindi le prime ore le abbiamo fatte così, ma le nostre centrali sono già organizzate così, perché noi abbiamo il doppio di posti operatore in ogni centrale, quindi abitando tutti i posti operatori raddoppiamo il numero di personale, e se occorresse, questo l'avevo pensato in caso di disaster recovery, se occorresse avessi una centrale con un disaster recovery per più tempo, con l'elicottero porto il personale in una centrale salva che è di una stazione fresciata, e quindi non è caduta, e quindi riesco ad abitare tutte le postazioni che sono sempre il doppio rispetto a questa disponibilità. Terzo, essendo un'emergenza sanitaria, è stata rivoluzionata, ma era sempre casa nostra, e per questo ci occorre una grande integrazione, è stata completamente riorganizzata l'attività all'interno delle sale operative del supporto sanitario. Vi ricordo sempre che siamo sui 10 milioni di abitanti, più o meno una media nazione europea. Questo significa che avere un'organizzazione così non è quella provinciale, non è quella regionale,
certo.
E quindi avere questa organizzazione vuol dire avere anche la struttura che ti permette di fare questo, e quindi avere un'azienda.
Chiaro. Benissimo, allora io ti ringrazio Alberto per questo tempo che ci hai dedicato, e soprattutto ti ringrazio per il lavoro che tu e tutti i tuoi colleghi di AREU state svolgendo per la cittadinanza in questi giorni così critici per tutti quanti noi. Ti auguro quindi buon lavoro.
Salute, che non vi succeda quello che è successo a noi, e quindi che non ci sia la virulenza che c'è stata con noi, e soprattutto organizzarsi prima. Queste cose è un caso che succede una volta ogni 100 anni, ma queste cose devono essere organizzate un po' prima. Se avete la possibilità di farlo, pensateci adesso a riorganizzare la vostra attività.
Bene, grazie mille. Ancora una volta un saluto.
Grazie a voi. Ciao. Ciao a tutti.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed this this video and the word of Dr. Zoli. I found it to be a very powerful testimony. While we are preparing for the next slides, I want to check if Luca is here and if Luca wants to say a few words. The Q&A will be at the end of this webinar, but Luca, do you want to say a few words?
Hi, Gary. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, I would just like to thank Dr. Zoli for the time he dedicated. Probably some of you have noticed he was not in the best shape because he was going from meeting to meeting in a basically 24-hour shift in managing the emergency services. So despite the situation, he eventually found some time to share his thoughts with us. I found impressive the times he's talking about, the speed on which in this emergency everybody was working to set up the extra services, and I was really interested in seeing how they changed the procedures. Remember, by the way, the slides you have seen there are available at EENA, also in English, just in case you want to take a look at them more carefully. But the impressive thing was how they changed the way 112 call takers were answering. We have civilian call takers in Italy. They are not medicians or experts. So they have been, in some extent, fast trained in asking certain typical medical questions, which are normally left to the medical dispatch. And this reorganization, in fact, let's say, transformed the process. I will try later on to answer the questions in the question and answer phase, but just keep in mind, if there are things that I'm not able to respond directly, I will pass it on to Dr. Zoli for a second round, let's say.
Thank you very much, Luca. Thank you, impressive. Okay, so now we will go through the next point in the agenda, which is our presentation. Here are the names of my colleagues who will be presenting, and you'll hear from all of them very soon. Maybe we can move to the next slide, Benoit. Thank you very much. First, a disclaimer, just to say that our view on this was that we didn't want to bother our members who are already, for many of them, busy enough. So what we did is that we collected the information we got from news and media sources and online advice from governmental services between 19 and 24 of March, and we will keep on updating the document. It hasn't been checked and verified by all the emergency services, again, for the same reason. So it's constantly changing, so apologies in advance if there are some things that are not up to date or not yet extremely accurate. The objective is to help emergency services in each country to learn from each other and to prepare their emergency call and communication services. It's not intended for the general public. And if you have any more information, please feel free to correct our information or send us new information. You have the email address of our colleague Rose here, rm@eena.org. Feel free to contribute. On the next slides, just a quick agenda of our presentation. We'll talk about how we did this research, the strategies and changes in the countries, the different services and the number to contact. We'll talk about some additional considerations that are being used by countries, several countries. We'll talk about public warning, reverse 112, and we'll try to provide you with a list of recommendations from the work we've done. On the next slide, thank you, Benoit. So the purpose, again, of this is to provide an overview of how each country is managing the outbreak and the challenges that can arise. Again, for emergency services to be able to learn from each other. Here, we're also thinking about emergency services outside Europe, that some of them would, in other continents, might have more time to prepare because they might not have reached the same phase in the pandemic. To identify trends and common strategies, also to share some innovative solutions that have been proposed in some countries. Again, as previously mentioned, the sources of information are the official sources, the news and media. And the information was collected at a certain time, and again, the situation is ongoing and often changing. So we apologize in advance for any inaccuracies. I will now give the floor to my colleague Marta, who will present the first part of the presentation.
Hello everyone, Marta here. So now I'll be talking about the strategies and changes that occur in the different European countries. First of all, it's important to understand which authority is in charge for dealing with this outbreak, and to understand who is in charge, it is necessary to understand the dynamics of the country. As you know, health systems across Europe are managed in very different ways. So in the table below, you can see the different types of systems. We organize it in 3 clusters. We have the centralized, the concentrated, and centralized systems. The centralized systems are common in federal states like Austria, Germany, Belgium. For example, here in Belgium, where we have the main responsibilities shared between the federal government and the federated authorities like communities and regions. And the body in charge is the Federal Public Service that is in charge of health, food chain safety, and environment. These systems are also common in Scandinavian countries, for example, like Denmark, where the Danish Health Authority is in charge. Italy and Spain, you have these systems, and the powers are highly decentralized to regional authorities. For example, in Spain, the Spanish government is in charge, but each region also plays a role. Then we have the concentrated systems that are found in Bulgaria, France, Greece, and Portugal. So they can be centralized, or they can even be partially centralized or decentralized systems. What is important to notice here is that they are structured at the territorial level, so regional and departmental. For example, in the case of Portugal, you have the Ministry of Health in charge. However, the autonomous regions of Azores and Madeira are structured at the regional level. The rest of the countries are characterized by centralized systems, which means either that the main responsibilities are held by an entity, like in Ireland, where the body in charge is the Health Service Executive, or that the system is centralized and highly regulated, as in the case in Malta, where the Maltese government is in charge. Moving on to the next slide. We'll be talking now about the increase of the volume of calls. As you know, in most countries, the volume of calls has increased significantly. So we wanted to understand why or when. We identified some trends among the different European countries. The first one is that the number of calls increase as the number of infected people increases in the countries. For example, in Italy, when were no cases of COVID-19, around 5,000 calls were made to the 112 center in Milan. Then after the first case was confirmed, the center have received more than 10,000 calls. As you can see here, the calls doubled. In Portugal mainland, the helpline of the Ministry of Health reached a historic number of calls, more than 13,000 calls on the 2nd March, shortly after confirmation of the first 2 cases in the country. Interesting to note also that the volume of calls also increased when Europe started to be more affected. For example, here in Belgium, where Italy got severely hit by the virus, the number of daily calls on the information helpline jumped from 30 calls to 300 calls per day. Another trend is that the number of calls increased when the COVID-19 was considered a pandemic by the World Health Organization, WHO, on the 11th March. In Greece, the day after the WHO announcement, they've received 20,000 calls to the 1135 call center. Some days before, they had received 50,000 calls. So here also a slight increase on the number of calls. In Sweden, for example, after the WHO announcement, the general information line 11313 that usually has 30 calls per day peaked at 35,000 calls. This information was provided to us by SOS Alarm, the organization in charge in Sweden for the call handling. After the announcement, also many countries have changed their strategy to mitigate the high number of calls. For example, Latvia and Malta. We will talk about the strategies in the next slides. The number of calls increased also after the countries announced state of emergency. As you know, many countries have declared state of emergency, especially last week, which was when many emergency centers received the highest number of calls. The week following the WHO declaration, many emergency centers turned out to be overwhelmed with calls. For example, critical cases are Spain or France, where emergency lines were really saturated. Not only the emergency lines, but also the information and medical helplines were saturated, some with very long waiting times. For example, in Sweden, you could read on the website extremely high volume of calls, waiting time longer than the usual. In Portugal, on one day, the helpline received 30,000 calls and around almost 4,000 people gave up waiting for the service. This virus is a challenge for all of us as citizens, but is also a challenging period for PSAPs, for the call centers that have been extremely saturated in recent weeks. I also just want to make a small note about misinformation. For example, in Czechia, the line congestion increased after the spread of rumors that the helpline was answered by epidemiologists. So in this case, dissemination of wrong information can also lead to an increase in the volume of calls. To conclude, I think it's very easy to assess the increase in the number of calls is correlated with the increase of the population fear. So what are countries doing to mitigate this high number of calls? We will now discuss the different strategies that are being adapted. So since the outbreak is evolutionary, country strategies are also changing with great frequency. One of the strategies that countries are adapting is the creation of more numbers to cope with the increase of the volume of calls and to clear emergency lines like 112. Among other countries, in Croatia, a new national hotline, 113, was created. In Estonia, a new information helpline, 1247, also was created. And in Latvia, a new line was created, 1303, for people to call regarding laboratory testing. In Italy, as Dr. Zoli said in his presentation, to respond to the high volume of calls, there were created regional toll-free numbers established to answer questions about COVID-19. Another strategy was also encourage people to call their GPs. For people who think they might be infected or have severe symptoms, some countries encourage now to call their general practitioner, the GPs. There is a case, for example, of the Netherlands, Hungary, or Ireland. The next strategy was the increase of staff. Increasing the response capacity was a strategy common to many countries. Malta will have more 40 professionals to help their call center. In Portugal, the helpline will be reinforced with 81 more nurses. Portugal is a particular case because they don't have a specific line for COVID-19, so the strategy was also undergone a team reorganization. Having a team dedicated to citizens with symptoms of the virus, other to track people with complaints not related to COVID-19, and a third team of nurses focused on providing medical information. Another way that countries found to manage the influx of calls is through volunteers. In France, Slovenia, Finland, medicine students are helping to answer the high number of calls. In Malta, NGOs are also looking for volunteers. And in the UK, the London Ambulance Service have asked former call takers to volunteer to work in the call centers. Also, interesting strategy in France, call takers from fire departments are assisting in the medical service call centers. An important point that we like to reinforce is that regardless of human resources, technology needs also to support this reinforcement. Online tools and dedicated websites was also a strategy. Countries have created different online resources to help citizens, as my colleague Rose will explain later. A common strategy of all the countries is, of course, to avoid calling 112 or other national emergency medical service unless it is a real urgency. I will now give the floor to my colleague Benoit.
Yeah, so now it's my turn. Hello, everybody. We've seen that in general, there were 3 different call numbers that were promoted, depending on the symptoms and what kind of question people might have. So, of course, for people having acute symptoms or in acute need of help, of course, the, let's say, typical emergency number for health emergencies was recommended. But then there were also a lot of people, having issues related to mild symptoms when you start coughing or having fever, and so a lot of people need to respond to these concerns. And then there's also a general information number, because even if we don't have symptoms, we still might have a lot of questions about how the pandemic is spreading, or also about like the measures that were adopted by the government. So a general information was set up in most of the countries to try to answer those questions. So we see that typically authorities did communicate and still communicate on those 3 different levels of number. So I'm going to show some maps to show you a bit the situation in different countries. But as it was said earlier, this is information that we managed to collect. If you see that something is wrong in your country, please feel free to advise either in the chat or by sending an email to the mail direction that you saw earlier. So the first map is the map of the numbers to reach the medical emergency services. We see that in many countries, those services can be reached through 112 as the single emergency number for the country, but also in some countries, 112 is also the number for emergency medical services. And actually, the countries that appear in yellow, it's 112 is common for medical services and for the firefighters, but many countries, especially in continental Europe, have a specific number for emergency medical services. So, of course, the model changes a bit depending on the countries, but that also might impact the cooperation between the emergency services, actually. In the next map, I will show you the second level of emergency numbers to dial. We see that many different countries already had available a medical helpline, which is like a non-emergency number that people can contact in case they have some questions. So that's the case in most of the countries that you see in green. For some countries, it's 116, 117, which is a common European number. And just note that in some countries, some of these countries, these hotlines may not be available 24/7. Some countries have managed to set up instantly a number for the crisis. Once again, this is for medical advice. So of course, you need to have people with medical experience to be able to handle these calls. And in some countries, there is no such specific number to provide some medical advice, but in that case, it is recommended to the population to call their general practitioner when the symptoms appear. And in some countries, this calling the general practitioner can be completed by, let's say, a hotline that is available for outside of the normal working hours. So let's say during nights or during the weekends when the GPs are not always available. So we see that the strategies in the different countries were quite different depending also on how the situation was in the country and how it affected. You see that, for instance, in the case also of Latvia and Croatia, a medical line was already existing. It was a long number, but some like a new line was set up with a short number. So, for instance, 113 in Croatia or 8303 in Latvia. And what you see in Denmark is there was a medical helpline available in the region of Copenhagen, not in the other region. So this has been set up in the other region to help during the crisis. And then in the third map, you can see that in most of the countries, almost all of the European countries, there is a general information number that people can contact for general questions. So these numbers may not be used to get some medical help because the call takers are not trained to face that. But you see that in most countries, the strategy is actually to have these numbers maintained nationally. Though some countries also have some local information number that are managed by the region, so some local entities. And we see that actually even some federal countries such as Switzerland or Austria do have some national information numbers, and a country like Germany that is also federalized have both a national and a local information number. Something that is interesting to see is that, for instance, in Sweden, there was a short number that was already available for general questions or general information number about some ongoing crisis. It can be because there's like a fire or something. And then this number was already kind of existing and quite known by the population. So that also helped to communicate to the population, and also the fact that it's a short number. You also have these short numbers in other countries, but having a short number, of course, helps the population to remember this number. I'm Passing now the floor to my colleague Rose.
Yes, so through looking at how each country have managed the outbreak, we also wanted to highlight some additional considerations that we need to think about when thinking about how we manage this outbreak. So one is accessibility. For instance, for people with disabilities, we see several countries that are taking different initiatives in order to make the information accessible. In France, we see that there are specific indications for deaf and hard of hearing citizens, and there is also a dedicated web page for people with disabilities in order to inform them on what to do if they have symptoms and general information about the outbreak in France. In Italy, we also see that RAI, the national broadcaster, has created a television spot for the Ministry of Health, where they can raise awareness about daily good practices that citizens can follow, and this is also in sign language. And in Iceland, we see that they have set up a website with an option for the information to be read aloud. In several different countries, for instance, Slovakia, Lithuania, Portugal, Hungary, we see that they're using email addresses that people can send general questions to. And in Iceland, there is also the option to have an online chat for general information about coronavirus in Iceland. And we can go to the next slide. So we also should think about whether the services are free. So in most countries, the hotlines are free. And we see also in Portugal that the hotline from the Ministry of Health is now toll-free. And also to do with languages, in Estonia, for instance, calls to the hotline 1247 are answered in Estonian, but also Russian and English, so all three languages. And we should also mention private numbers. So in Poland, some of the private clinical groups also have their own hotlines. So what's important to note is that you do not have to be a customer in order to use these hotlines. So it's for customers, and also general citizens can call these private clinical helplines. And many countries are also providing numbers for their citizens that are abroad. For instance, in Estonia, you can call the information helpline from abroad on a +372 number. And in Iceland, if you're using a non-Icelandic phone, you can call the helpline on +354. Also, we see in Portugal, Romania, Belgium, they all have installed numbers for their citizens abroad so that they can call back to their country to get information on how to react during this outbreak. And in Malta, we see that there is a helpline and email address for tourists that are in the country. We should also talk about apps. We have a few examples here that in Belgium, for instance, there's a new free app that enables medical staff, for instance, in hospitals, access to information about patients that have already been confirmed of having coronavirus or are suspected of having the virus. And this helps them to follow the progress of the patients while they're at home. In Poland, there's also the Stay Home app, which helps people to be easily located, to directly call the helpline, and to help elderly people or people living alone during their confinement. In Spain, also, we see that there have been some apps launched as an alternative to calling for medical information to help people check their symptoms. And as Marta mentioned briefly earlier, there has been many instances of dedicated websites and online services being implemented. For instance, online tests to check symptoms. So we see this in the United Kingdom, where citizens that are experiencing symptoms are asked to first consult the online 111 service. So this was already in place before the outbreak, but on the 4th of March, they updated the service with the information about the coronavirus. And in Denmark, we also see an online test, which helps people to decide based on their symptoms who they should call. And also in France, we see an online test for symptoms to help people know how to proceed. In many countries, for instance, in Iceland, Croatia, Belgium, we see also dedicated websites for the virus. This includes general information to citizens about best practices, what to do if they have symptoms, and how the virus is being managed in their country. And we also should think about what impact that the outbreak of COVID-19 has on other services in the countries So we have a couple of examples here. For instance, in France, there are fears that the confinement will lead to an increase in calls to domestic violence hotline. And also in France, but also in the United Kingdom, there has been an increase in calls to Childline during the outbreak. So it's interesting to also consider what impact this will have on other services. And the final consideration that we will talk about today is also drones. So these are being used in different ways in order to help fight the outbreak of COVID-19. So here we have a few practical examples. In China, for instance, drones are being used to transport medical samples. In Spain, France, Belgium, Malaysia, surveillance drones are being used to enforce the restrictions that are under place. In the USA, we see that they're being used to educate the community about how they should react during the outbreak, and also to protect vulnerable populations such as the homeless. And these are being used alongside groups of patrols. And in Dubai, we also see that drones are being used to disseminate critical information to the public. So these are just some examples of how some organizations are using drones in their strategies, for instance, in urban areas, in order to fight the outbreak. And I'll now pass to my colleague Benoit, who will talk about public warning.
Yeah, hello again, this is Benoit. So we spoke, so now I will speak about more the part on the communication to the population and everything that is related to public warning in general. And actually this time was very interesting because there was a need from all the authorities to communicate to the population, to communicate very clearly, quite instantly, and also as fast as possible, because time does matter in this crisis. So there were different things to communicate to the population. So there were some safety tips, all the instructions on like keeping distance while washing the hands, etc. You're now familiar with these instructions, I hope. But also to communicate on the latest adopted measures, because governments were taking measures of sometimes confinement or closing of public spaces, but these measures need to be communicated as fast as possible, because they were to be applied a few hours after. So the population should have been informed as quick as possible of these measures. And it's actually, I think, the first time we see a crisis like this where a big quantity of information needs to reach everybody in such a large scale, because in basically any country, some public warning systems were used, and all the public authorities, of course, favored a multi-channel approach to reach as many people as possible and as fast as possible. So, of course, we've seen a lot of special public announcements on TVs and radios, also on newspapers and any kind of media. Most of the national websites were also used and updated with the latest information and instructions. The social media, of course, all the authorities communicated on social media. What was very interesting is that we saw a lot of online platforms also playing a big part in relaying the information, be it on on the search engines, the social media platform, also the streaming platforms. We saw a lot of cases where the public authorities could send messages to the population through these online platforms, and I find it very interesting. Like myself, I have to say, I don't go very often to the website of the Ministry of Interior of Belgium, but I do use a lot the platform like Spotify, for instance, and I saw the instructions through this platform, and I found this very interesting, and we saw that it does work very well. In some countries, some emails were also sent to the population. We also saw on the roads, for the people that were still using their cars, the variable message signs being updated with the relevant numbers to contact and the latest information. And I'm going to focus on also showing that some country did send alerts to the mobile phone of the citizens. So, of course, there's different technologies that can enable the sending of alerts on mobile phones to the population. We see that, of course, the most known one is cell broadcast that is available in a few European countries. And in these countries, it was used to send advices to the population. So we saw that, for instance, in the Netherlands, in Romania, or in Greece, we see that, for instance, in the case of Romania, after the alert, I did include a link so that you can click and have more information about the communication. We saw also that in Greece, which is a country with a high number of visitors and foreign people, that the message was also translated in English. So that's so as to make sure that all the population, or like as many people as possible, will understand the message. And overall, I have to say that the messages were short, clear, straight to the point, and quite easily understandable. So it was quite direct, and that worked out quite well. And we see that in terms of timing, when it was sent, we usually see that it was sent when the first measures were being taken. When it comes to nationwide SMS, some countries, such as France, Denmark, or the United Kingdom, did send some SMS to all the population in the country, or all the mobile subscribers, should I say. And what is interesting is that these countries do not particularly have a system in place already. They don't have like any equipment or infrastructure that was prepared for that, but they were still able to send this message with the cooperation of the mobile network operators. So that is quite interesting, because it shows that any country can basically do that and send this nationwide SMS. So these messages, you can see some examples here, might include some safety tips, basically like stay at home, and also it can communicate about the measures that were adopted. So we can see here the case for the United Kingdom, where they alert on the fact that new rules are enforced now, also in France, and this goes with a link to find out more information about these measures. We can see also that the Danish authorities favor the very, let's say, easy and very simple message. Just keep distance from each other, show consideration, even when it's sunny, or like so that we can stop spreading the virus. Have a good weekend. So it's very simple message also that can be sent by authorities. And something that is interesting is with these examples is that we see that it's also different kind of authorities that use this technology. In the UK and in France, it was the case of the national government, but in Portugal, it was the Civil Protection Agency, while in Denmark, it was actually the police that used this technology. And then some countries, such as Austria or Germany, where the public warning systems rely on apps like Nina and Cat1 that are used in these countries. Of course, these apps were used to communicate some messages. So those are for some national alerting, but of course, in some countries, or at least the countries that can do it, some more localized alerts could have been sent as well. And also, like these technologies enabling the location-based alerting can also help the public authorities to get more situational awareness about the people and their behavior. Yeah, just drinking a bit of water before continuing. So now we're going to show some practical examples that were shared with us actually in the past days, and that show the measures that were some measures that were being adopted more operationally on the PSAP side to protect the call takers, because obviously all the countries and all of you, I guess, are facing some call overflow plus some staff issues. So it's quite tricky actually to move around those two issues at the same time and try to keep a service that is able to respond to the population's requirements. So we see that in Finland, for instance, sorry, it's quite long. I will not like read everything, but we see that, for instance, in Finland, a lot of measures were taken to protect the call takers. So, of course, the health of all the call takers were carefully monitored. The visits from external people were banned in the PSAPs. And also, what is interesting is that Finland has a system where basically, when you call 112, you are connected to the, let's say, the closest PSAP but in general, after 15 seconds, if the PSAP is too busy, the call is diverted to another PSAP in the country. This call overflow time basically has been reduced from 15 to 8 seconds, actually, to manage better the call overflow in the country. And of course, actually the trainings of the staff was paused, and in the meanwhile, the students were hired to for basically any supporting duties. In Sweden, first of all, the great news is that all the staff of SOS Alarm is healthy, and there hasn't been any reported case of people showing any that has been tested positive to the virus in Sweden, and so some protective measures were also taken to better protect the staff, a bit like we saw in Finland. What is very interesting in this email also is these very interesting figures about the increase of calls. We see, for instance, that for the general information number that I told you about a bit earlier today, the 11313, usually they have about 30 calls per day, and because of this crisis, there was a big overflow to this general information number, and it peaked, for instance, at 13,000 calls in just one day, compared to 30,000 usually. So of course, there's lots of things to adapt to, and you have to put additional staff to respond to these calls, etc. So it's quite an impressive figure that was shared. In Ireland, actually, the home working has been favored even for call takers. Keeping in mind that here we talk about BT, so it's the stage 1 PSAP in Ireland. The call takers were allowed to do some home working, and this concerned about 10% of the working force. And of course, some other protective measures were taken. Also, a new PSAP was opened for contingency purposes, and yeah, basically, and like many different measures that are taken to better protect the population and avoid high social contact between the workforce. And same goes in Iceland, where home working of the let's say more administrative staff is encouraged, so as to reduce as much as possible the number of people in the 112 PSAP in Reykjavik. Of course, also some work on ergonomics has been done in the control rooms, so as basically to here again to reduce the social contact between the call takers. So now they are being devised in different small clusters, so that they can be a small group of people and avoid seeing everybody basically. And also some reserve staff has been contacted and can be used in case of increased number of calls. Finally, last example with Lithuania, some measures were also taken to protect the staff. The external visits, of course, have been forbidden for understandable reasons. The personal hygiene of the staff also was a strong focus for the management of the 112 PSAP, and the home working was also encouraged for the administration of the PSAP. So I guess this is it for the countries, and now I'll give back the floor to Gary for the final recommendations.
Thank you very much, Benoit. So I'll try to run through a series of recommendations, and of course they are what they are. We try to do the best to come up with some of the recommendations based on what we read and the information we got. So the first recommendation that we would give is to leave emergency numbers for acute cases and to use either some or all of these options. To set up a dedicated information number free of charge, which should be available 24/7, to make sure that enough information is available online, dedicated website, apps, etc., and that it is well communicated. Maybe an additional recommendation is that is to make it available directly 24/7. Several countries had opened an information helpline only during the daily hours, the working hours first, and then they had to extend it to 24/7, and they suffered quite many complaints. The other recommendation is to use a non-emergency medical helpline if you have one, or to set one up, like some countries did. And another recommendation is to ask citizens to call general practitioners directly or first. It's what some countries are doing to avoid saturation of emergency call centers. The second recommendation we would give for emergency calls overflow among your PSAPs, if your technology allows it. So we could give several examples. You saw the Finnish example, which Benoit presented a few minutes ago. There is also a country like Slovenia that worked with the mobile operators to make sure that the calls can be redispatched among emergency call centers. A third recommendation is, of course, to protect the call takers and you've heard from Benoit the many initiatives. For example, to ask administrative staff to work from home, to put in place the proper quarantine measures, to ask any personnel feeling ill to stay home, of course, to plan how to react if there is a COVID-19 case in your personnel, to optimize ergonomics and the shifts in your PSAPs. You saw here from the excellent overview from the Icelandics. To organize regular disinfection of your PSAPs, and to organize call taking from home if your technology allows it. I know that many of you are already using home call taking, and I know that those of you who are not doing it are planning to do it very soon in the future, as soon as possible. The point 4 is to consider increasing in staff, of course, and also by learning from experiences of other countries. You saw the examples of hiring students, asking retired call takers to help, asking former call takers to come back to the PSAP. These are some of the initiatives of several European countries. Think about what to do in case one PSAP has to prepare a contingency plan. This is pretty straightforward, but it's worth knowing, of course. To consider the use of IVR in PSAPs to remind callers to call another number for COVID information or for medical advice. Another recommendation is to make sure to dedicate some time to adapting and readapting to the situation. It's going through a crisis, and of course it's hard to find the time to do so. But to make sure that the decisions are clearly communicated to citizens. And this may require avoiding too many changes of plan and to try to put in place stable measures as early as possible. I know this is a sensitive topic, but several countries can now learn from the countries, for instance, in Asia or Southern Europe, and can learn from it to put in place the right measures, as Dr. Zoli said. This is where learning from other countries can be useful, and EENA will play its part there. On the point, the number 8 that I had here is to keep on looking at what is being done in other countries, especially the most affected ones, and we will provide regular updates to our members. Remember to make information and emergency services accessible to people with disabilities. Make sure to keep a good, and even better if you can, coordination between all the different public safety organizations. This is about overflow of calls, availability of hospital beds, availability of patient transportation means. More than ever, you will need to work with other public safety organizations, and you know it far better than I do. On the next slide. One of the recommendations, if you didn't do it yet, is to use a multi-channel public warning with clear and coherent messages to avoid misinformation. As you know, misinformation is spreading, and we will be talking about that a bit later today. If your reverse 112 technology enables it, consider sending localized messages in addition to nationwide alerts, because as you know, sometimes some regions in your countries are far more affected than some others, and they may require additional measures which maybe do not apply to the entire country. Make sure your information number and or medical line number are accessible for your citizens who are abroad, so that they can reach the right line in their country, in their language. And the last point is that technology can be an ally. For example, aggregated data, drones, artificial intelligence, the cooperation with platforms. A point that I would like to mention a little bit further in this call, by the way. But remember that the virus didn't yet kill privacy rights. And to that end, we added here the fantastic op-ed by Harari in the Financial Times, which we kindly invite you to read. Talking about platforms and to follow up on the recommendations, please note that Twitter contacted us today to ask what they could do for the EENA community. So please, during the conversation or by email, feel free to contact me or contact us to suggest how Twitter could help you. It may be by advertising the right numbers, by doing something on some other things. Twitter is willing to help emergency services during COVID-19. So please reach out to us, and we can pass the message to Twitter. That was just a side note. And I think that was it on my side for the recommendations. And now, sorry, we are a little bit late, but we really want to open and give you the floor so that you ask questions to us or to other participants to this webinar. Floor is yours. Anyone willing to comment, contribute?
This is Mike King. If I could take a minute at some point, I'd like to just share a couple of things.
Yes, Mike.
Could I have a screen share?
We will make sure you can share your screen.
Thank you.
And I think there was someone else who wanted to speak, so please, you will be speaking right after Mike.
And while I wait for the screen share to come up, I'm going to just put in the chat window a link to some resources that are available to everyone, and just send to you our best wishes from our corporate headquarters in the U.S. We are just so sad this thing is going on across the globe. It's taking me one moment to get the permissions taken care of.
Mike, I think you should now be possibly a presenter, so you have a button to be able to share your screen.
Yeah, for some reason, it kicked me completely out. I can hear the audio because I'm on the phone. So why don't you go ahead with your other question, and yes, I'm going to re-log in.
Thank you, Mike. We will do so, and we'll wait back for you. Anyone else wanted to contribute?
Yes, it was actually one question. Amélie Grandjard from Gelicom. So as you know, I'm working on public warning system both in France and in Belgium. It's more a question because I've also made a PhD in crisis management, and I was wondering, for the next years, this crisis will be lessons to learn, and so we need to gather as much possible data as possible. So you have already gathered information about public warning use, and I was wondering if you had any feedbacks on a sociological study on how people in different countries has perceived and has felt this use of public warning systems, so that we can move on the question of efficiency of this public warning system, not just about technique and which media has been used.
Unfortunately, we do not have this data, Amélie, but it would be super interesting to get.
I think overall, like you have a very important point that public warning and communication to the public is not about technology. It's about like having also a focus on like the target and the people, like, will they receive the information and how will they perceive it? And I think this is really the first question that one should ask itself is, how will my message be perceived? And be very interested in reading any study about that. I think we need a bit more time to look at that, but it will be interesting to have a look. Yeah.
Amélie, Jérôme speaking from EENA. Actually, we have one paper that is available on EENA webpage related to coronavirus resources that is called basically Psychological Perspectives, Advice from Psychology on How to Communicate. So it could be quite interesting maybe for you if you have not gone through this resource to look at it, because it's a lot of very interesting things. It has been made by the British Psychological Society, and I think it's a good resource to start with, at least.
Thank you very much.
And without sharing too much, Amélie, I know that some countries have not used public warning because of the psychological, possibly sociological impact as well. But I cannot share more here. Okay. Any other question?
Quick point from me, Dimitri. Hi, everybody.
Hey.
I just wanted to add something about Twitter and also Google that has been implemented in Greece, and that is if you're reaching Google from Greece, you will automatically get in the front page direct information about coronavirus from the National Organization from Public Health, and the same Twitter. So if you open Twitter, you will get one of the first things you will see is a banner that you could press and be directed to the site from the National Organization for Public Health. So that is an easy way to spread valuable and valid information to the public.
More than easy, I think it's a necessary way, actually, and the current crisis, as you rightly said, in many countries just show that it is possible, and like the message can be spread through like any platform, and that really helps to reach as many people as possible.
That gives me hearing from some of you. We are planning a series of future webinars. I think EENA colleagues, we should do one with the platforms. Let's talk about that. That might be a need. I think working with the platforms. All right. Any other contributions and questions?
Jerome, Mike King, I'm back. If you could give me screen access, I just in case I have problems still, I'm going to post a link in the window in the chat box, and I can just speak to this if we can't get the screen working.
All right. We see the link, Gary here. We see the link, but your presentation doesn't seem to be working. Your screen sharing doesn't seem to be working.
Is there an 801 USA number on there? Chat number 123. When I signed back on, it didn't ask for my name.
I do not really know.
And perhaps you could just do this. Why don't you share your screen and just click on that link, and I'll just speak to it quickly.
I think Benoit can do it, yeah.
Yeah, so to those on the call, this is Mike King.
If Jerome can share the screen, please. Or allow me to share my screen, but I cannot do that anymore.
Ah, yes.
Sorry, Mike.
So I'm not seeing the screen, so let me just speak to this real quickly to save time. For those on the call, please take that link and explore that website. These are free data sources on the COVID virus. Oh, there we go. If you could just scroll to the top of that page, please. Here, there are a number of things. Oh, yeah, there we go. There are a number of things that I think you'll find valuable and helpful. Our disaster response team has fielded 1,900 calls from governments around the world in the last 10 days. We're working about 16 hours a day on COVID response and have assembled the most authoritative data source globally that there is on the virus, real-time numbers and spread. That first link that you'll see there is if you are a non-ESRI customer and you need help from any of the things that you see in this web page, we're offering free software to those government agencies that, and frankly, to private organizations that qualify. So through that red request GIS assistance button, you can request information. If you would just scroll down to that first dashboard, we have partnered with the World Health Organization and with Johns Hopkins University to create a number of dashboards to monitor the creep of the coronavirus so that we can better understand what's happening in each region of the world. In some regions, like in the United States, we've got that data down to a county-wide level or a very small jurisdictional boundary. In many of your areas, it is based on what's available at the country level. But if you could just click on the link that I pasted into the chat box, this will give you an example of the United States, who sadly now has passed even China in the number of events that are going on. So we just recommend that you take some time, look at this, read some of the articles. If you could just on the left-hand side of that table, click on the USA 86,000 number. What this does is it gives you information, the map. You can zoom in and out. If you just zoom in on the map by scrolling, there you go. You'll see that for our country, we've been able to get right down to a regional level. As your individual countries provide more data, either to the World Health Organization or if you have it internally, you can use these same resources that are in the website that's provided to manage the creep locally and understand what's happening. With that, I know everyone is extremely busy. My contact information is there. Please reach out to me if you need any specific help. Know that our thoughts and prayers are with you all. We were fortunate to sit with EENA and their leadership just a month ago in their offices as this was all breaking, and we were trying to figure out whether we could even get out of Europe. So know that our hearts are with you and our support's behind you if you need it. The last link is just all of the PSAPs in the United States. I just put in the chat room with the county-wide creep occurring so that PSAP commanders, oh, I'm sorry, it's locked down still, so just disregard that one. But please take advantage of that and reach out to me if I can help. And thanks so much for what you're doing at EENA. Really appreciate our partnership with you.
Thank you very much, Mike, for this very useful resource that you shared. Thank you so much, and for your kind words as well. Anyone else wants to ask a question or contribute? All right, so I don't hear more comments, so we will be on time. I just want to take the opportunity to mention that we will organize another webinar on COVID-19, which will be about cyber threats and disinformation. This webinar will take place on Monday, 6th of April at 3 p.m. Brussels time, and it should be very interesting as well. So again, cyber threats and disinformation, and especially trying to understand how disinformation is spreading with several types of narratives spreading across countries, and also having an impact on emergency services, as it was mentioned by my colleague Marta. And we are thinking about another series of information and webinar which may come up in the next weeks as well. I guess that is it for today. This webinar has been recorded. It will be shared online in the next hour, basically, so you will be able to replay it and to share it with people who couldn't watch it. I really would like to thank the people who have contributed and those of you who attended this call. And on behalf of EENA, my colleagues and its board, I'd love to wish you good health and courage and good luck in these hard times. Stay safe and take care. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.